Hi, in this video we're gonna add dialog boxes to our RPG. You'll be able to talk to NPCs and you'll also get a message when you level up showing your new stats. This is how it'll work. We'll make an object called obj dialog, and every time we want a dialog box to pop up, we'll create an instance of this object. It'll contain an array of messages, and in the array, each message will be a struct. The struct for each message will contain the name of the speaker and the message itself. So this way, with structs in the array, you have a list of messages, and the obj dialog instance will go through this array, drawing each message one by one. So let's open our project and get started. Let's make our dialog object first. I'll make a new object and name this obj dialog. I'll add the create event and make some variables. First we have the messages array. It's empty by default and this will be assigned later depending on the dialog. We have a variable that stores which message you're on from the array, and by default it's -1, meaning that the dialog hasn't started yet, because remember, an array starts from 0. We have current char. This is how many characters from the string have been drawn. That's because we want a typewriter effect in our game, and this variable controls how many characters are visible from the current message at any given moment. Draw message is the actual string that's being drawn on the screen, because we don't want to draw the full string immediately, but a part of it depending on how many characters should be visible. So this variable stores that cutout string with only the characters that need to be visible in the current moment. Then we have char speed, that's how fast characters appear, and then input key, that's the key used to speed up the text and move to the next message once the current message is over. Finally, we have the width of the GUI layer and also the height of the GUI layer, so that we can place the dialog box according to the GUI area, no matter what the actual resolution is. Now we're gonna add the step event where the actual logic of the dialog box will take place. Let's add a condition to check if the current message index is below 0, meaning the dialog hasn't started yet. So we'll exit the event so nothing happens. Then let's get the string from the array. So we'll get the current message out of the array. And because each message is a struct, remember, here we want to get the actual message. So we'll use the variable name for it, which is gonna be MSG. Now we want to check if we haven't fully displayed the string yet. So we'll check if the current char variable is smaller than the length of the message string. In that case, we'll increase current char by the char speed multiplied by 1 plus the input from the input key. This means that normally char speed will just be multiplied by 1, but if you are holding the input key, the speed will be multiplied with 1 plus 1 equals 2, so the message goes twice as fast. If you do see this yellow line, meaning there's a warning, it's saying you can't add a number and a boolean together, even though in GML you can do that because true and false are just 1 and 0. But if you do want to remove this warning, you can wrap the keyboard check function within a real function, so the boolean is converted into a real or a number and the warning disappears. Now we want to cut out the string to display only a part of the message. That will be stored in draw message, and it will copy the string that we took from the struct. It will cut from the first character, and it will cut current char amount of characters from the string. So what we are doing here is basically getting the message from the array, checking if it's not been fully drawn yet, then increasing the number of characters drawn, and then cutting out that many characters from the string, which we'll draw later in the draw event. Now I'll add an else block here, which will run if the string has finished drawing completely. So in that case, we'll use another condition to check if the input key has been pressed, so we can move on to the next message. I'll increase the current message by 1, so we go to the next message in the array. But let's check if we are at the end of the array by checking if current message is greater than or equal to the length of the messages array. In that case, I'll destroy the instance so the dialog is over. Otherwise, if there is another message in the array, then I'll reset current char to 0 so the next message can start from the beginning. We're done with the logic, so now we'll move on to drawing the dialog box. For this, let's go into the events and add a draw GUI event for drawing directly to the GUI layer. We used the same event before for drawing our health and XP bars, so this is useful for drawing anything directly to the screen. I'll add some local variables. We have the X position of the box, its Y position, which is the GUI height multiplied with 0.7, so it's 70% of the way down vertically. Then we have the width of the box, which is the same as the width of the GUI area, and then the height of the box, which is the GUI height minus its Y position. This means that the box will cover the remaining 30% of the area vertically. Then we'll draw a box using draw sprite stretch and pass in the X, Y, width and height that we just calculated. Now I want to start drawing the text on it. We'll first draw the name of the speaker. I'll increase the X and Y by 16, that's where the name will be drawn. I'll set the font to font 1, the same font we created and used in the last video. Let's get the name from the array, so I'll get the current message from the array, and then from that struct, I'll get the name variable. I'll draw the name using draw text, pass in the position and the name string that we just got. Now we want to draw the actual message. Before doing that though, I'll increase the drawing Y by 40. So we are drawing the message 40 pixels below the name. I'll draw the text, but this time I'll use draw text ext. This function lets you define a maximum width for your text. So if the string goes past that width, it will wrap to the next line. This way the text will stay inside the box. I'll pass the X and the Y and the draw message string because that's the string that we want to draw, not the complete message. Then we have the line separation, which I want to keep at default, so I'll pass -1. And then we have the arguments for the maximum width of the text. For that, I'll use the box width and subtract the drawing X twice, so it acts as a margin for the left and right side of the box. With this, our dialog system is complete, so now we just have to find a way to use it. We're gonna make a function that creates this dialog object and passes in the messages. For that, let's go into the scripts folder and make our first script. I'll name this dialog. The main purpose of a script is to define global functions that any object can call and create global variables that any object can read or write to. We are first going to define a function called createDialog, which takes one parameter, that is the array of messages to use. In the function, we'll first check if objDialog already exists, and if it does, we'll end the function by using return. If it doesn't exist, we can create it, so I'll make an instance of that object. I've stored its ID in a variable. Through that variable, I'm gonna set the messages array of the dialog instance from the argument that was passed in. Then I'll set its current message variable to 0 so we can start the dialog from the first message in the array. All we have to do now is to test this function. So for that, I'll go into the objPlayer object and open the step event. Here I'll add a temporary condition to check if the space key was pressed. If so, I'm gonna call the createDialog function. I'll pass in an array, and that array will just have one struct. In the struct, I'll set the name to testDialog and the message to it works. You can write anything here just to test your dialog box. Now make sure that your syntax is correct here, otherwise you're gonna get an error. So first we have an array with square brackets, then we have a struct with curly brackets, then the name, then a comma, and then the message. And the colon is just how you make variables inside a struct, as opposed to an equal sign which you would use in an object. So run the game, and when you press space, the dialog will appear. Your message is visible and it's using the typewriter effect, so it's working perfectly. One issue though is that you can still control the player while the dialog box is active, and the enemies also move around, and we don't want this to happen, so let's fix that. First of all, in the step event of the player at the very top, we want to add a condition to check if the dialog instance exists. If it does, we'll exit the event so nothing happens and you can't move the player. We want to do the same in the enemy, so open the obj enemy parent object and go to the step event. Here too, at the very top, I'll add the same condition and then exit the event. With this, if you run the game when a dialog is active, you can't move anymore and the enemies also freeze. Now another issue is that the moment you close the dialog box, another one opens instantly, so you're infinitely stuck in this dialog box. It happens because when you press space to end your message, it takes that same input in the same step event and opens another box. The fix is simple, we have to use a different event for the dialog. So let's go into obj dialog and go to the step event. Here I'll right click on the step event, select change event and change it into the end step event. The end step event runs after a step event. So now when you press space and the message ends, it'll happen after the step event, so the dialog won't open again in the same frame. You can test this, run the game, create a dialog, and when it ends, you come out of it and then you can open another one. Our basic testing is done now, so I'll go into the player object and remove the temporary code that we added here. And now we're gonna work on adding an NPC that creates a dialog. Let's go into the asset browser and under objects, I'm gonna make a new object. I'll call this obj NPC parent. So this will be a parent for all the NPCs that we make. Then I'll make another object and this will be our first NPC, obj NPC1. I'll set its sprite to the first NPC. Then down here I'll set its parent object to obj NPC parent. So now it's a child of that object. Let's go back into obj NPC parent and code the NPC behavior. First of all, in the variables over here, I'm gonna make a variable called dialog. This will store the dialog array that this NPC displays. From the settings, I'll set its type to expression, so I can write a variable name here as its value. By default, it'll be -1, and we're gonna set it in the room editor itself. Now let's add the create event. Here I'll make a variable for the input key that you use to talk to the NPC, which will be space, and then a variable called canTalk that stores if the NPC is close enough to the player to be able to talk to them. Let's add the step event now. First of all, here let's add a check to see if the dialog instance exists, and if it does, we'll exit the event same as we did in the player and in the enemies. Then we want to check if the player is close enough. So we'll first check if the player exists. And then we'll check the distance to the player to see if it is less than 8 pixels. In that case, we're gonna set canTalk to true. Then let's check if the input key was pressed, and in that case, create a dialog. We'll pass in the dialog array for this NPC. At the end, let's add an else, so if the player doesn't exist or if it's not close enough, we'll set canTalk to false. Now when the NPC can talk, we want a little icon to appear above it. For that, let's go into the events and add the draw event. Here we first want the NPC to draw itself, so I'll call drawSelf. Then let's check if canTalk is true and that the obj dialog instance doesn't already exist. In that case, I'll draw the SPR talk sprite, its first frame, at the X of the NPC and its Y -16, so it appears 16 pixels above the NPC. Our NPC is finished now, so we're gonna set up our dialogues. For that, let's go into the dialog script. Here we're gonna make a global variable that will be the array for the first NPC. I'll call this welcome dialog and make it an array. In the array, I'll make the first message struct. I'll write the name of the NPC, then a comma, and then the message. Now I want to add the second message, so I'll add a comma after the first struct, then make another struct. Here I'll write the name of the main character and their message. And this way you can copy and paste the structs and add more messages. I'll make an array with 5 messages in total. Again, make sure your syntax is correct. We are making an array that has structs. In each struct, you have a comma whenever a new variable is about to begin. And again, in the array, we have a comma after each struct whenever there's another struct after it. Now you can see I've made 2 characters here, Cross and Sing. We want each character to have its own color that appears in the dialog box. For that, I'll make a struct up here called char colors. It'll have the colors for each character. First, I'll write a color for congrats, which we're gonna use later for the level up message. I'll make it yellow. Then after another comma, I'll make a color for cross, which is the NPC. This will be yellow too. And then for the main character, I'll make the color aqua. We want to pull these colors when we draw the dialog. So let's go into Obj Dialog. I'll open the Draw GUI event and go to the part where the name string is drawn. Before drawing the name, I'll call drawSetColor to change the color. And I'll use the global char colors variable. I'll pass in the name that we are drawing using the $accessor, which lets us pull a variable from the struct using a string. So it'll get the color for whichever name we are drawing and apply that to the text. Then after drawing the text, we should reset the color back to white, so I'm gonna do that. Now keep in mind that whenever you add a new character to your dialogues, you will need to add a color for it up here. Otherwise you're gonna get a crash when it tries to draw the name of a character but it can't find a color for it. We can finally test our NPC, so for that let's open our room. I'll place the first NPC instance over here. Let's double click on it to give it dialog. I'll open the variables and edit the dialog variable. I want this to be the welcome dialog array that we made in our script. So I'll set its value to global.welcome_dialog. That's the array that this NPC is gonna use for its dialog. And we have to use global dot before accessing a variable that we made in a script. I'll run the game now and you'll see the NPC here. If you go close to it, you'll see the icon appear above it. Press space and the dialog will start. Once you go through the messages one by one, at the end, the dialog will be over. Now I'm gonna show you how to add a second NPC to your game so you know how to expand this system and make more NPCs. We need a sprite for the second NPC first. So what you can do here is you can duplicate the sprite for the first NPC and you can go in the editor and change some things or draw a new NPC by yourself. What I'll do for now is I'll import a new sprite that I have for the second NPC, but I encourage you to be creative here and come up with your own NPC. Let's make the object now, so I'll make a new object called obj npc2. I'll set its sprite to the new NPC sprite, and down here in the parent, I'll set its parent to obj npc parent. Let's go into the dialog script and set up a new dialog array for this new NPC. I'll call this CamDialog1 because the name of this NPC will be Cam and this is its first dialog. It'll be an array and the first message struct will contain this. Then I'll add another message struct after a comma and it'll be this. The dialog is done now, but we did add a new character, so we need a color for it. Up here in the char colors struct, I'll add a comma, make a variable for the new NPC, and set its color to orange. You can put this in the room now, so let's open our game room. I'll put the second NPC over here. I'll also move the player a little and remove the testing enemy that we added in the last video. I'll double click on the new NPC, go into its variables and edit the dialog variable. I'll set this to the new global array that we just set up in the script. Run the game, you'll see the NPC here and you can talk to it. The new dialog will appear. You can then go and talk to the other NPC and this way you can go and make as many NPCs as you want. Our whole NPC system is complete now, but we still haven't made the message that appears when you level up, so let's work on that. So doing this is actually pretty simple. It's just one function call. Let's go into obj player and go into its create event. We're gonna add a call in the add XP function over here. We have a condition that checks if we have enough XP to level up, and we're gonna add the call inside this conditions block. We'll call the create dialog function. I'll make an array to pass into it, which will just have one struct. The name here will be congrats. We set up a color for this already in the script. Then the message will be a special string that begins with the $sign, so you can insert variables into the string. It'll say you leveled up, and then your new stats are, and then I'll write /n. This is a new line, so at this point the string will break into a new line, so it's like hitting enter when you're writing a document. Then it'll say level and then display the level variable. Then another new line, then HP and then the HP total variable. Finally another new line, then damage and then the damage variable. So go into the game, defeat enemies and level up. Once you do that, a message will appear congratulating you and you'll be able to see your new stats, which is your level, your total HP and damage. And with that, our dialog system is complete. You can use the create dialog function in any way you want, like we did with the leveling up. In the next video, we're gonna finish our game, so we'll do some basic fixes, finish our level design, and publish our game online so that anyone can play it. So I'll see you there.